It all started with a simple visit, but when Kamara noticed that her grandfather's neighbor, Dave, began coming around more often, her unease started to grow. With each of his glances, she felt an invisible threat closing in, though she couldn't quite understand what lay behind his friendly demeanor. One thing was clear: she had to act before everything spiraled out of control. Kamara sat in the car, her hands gripping the seat as the vehicle slowly made its way down the winding road. Outside, the scenery passed by in a blur, the trees thick and dark, their branches swaying in the soft wind. The road to Willow Glades seemed endless, and with each passing mile, Kamara's anxiety grew. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't quite put into words. She kept asking herself why she had to be here, why she couldn't just stay home with her mom. She tried to shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep within her, but it wouldn't go away. The old, familiar feeling of discomfort wrapped itself around her like a heavy blanket. The house, the town, everything felt so far removed from the life she had known in the city. It was as though she was being pulled back into a world she didn't belong to anymore. The car finally slowed as it approached the familiar sight of her grandfather's house. The worn-down porch, the creaky shutters, the overgrown garden. It all looked exactly the same, untouched by time. But Kamara didn't feel any of the comfort she used to. No relief, no joy. It all felt distant, like she was standing on the outside looking in. She hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, and as she stepped onto the gravel driveway, the sound of crunching stones beneath her feet made her feel even more disconnected. The house loomed in front of her like a memory she couldn't quite reach. She walked toward the front porch, her footsteps slow and heavy. Her grandfather, Jay, was sitting on the rocking chair, his worn face lighting up when he saw her. He greeted her with a warm smile and opened his arms wide as though nothing had changed. Kamara forced a smile, stepping into his embrace. She had always loved him, but this time the hug felt different. It wasn't as comforting as it once had been. She could feel the weight of the years between them, and the silence that followed felt thicker than ever. As they walked into the house, Kamara noticed the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. It was the same old house she remembered from her childhood, filled with the smells of wood smoke and fresh bread. Yet it didn't feel like home. It felt more like a place she was just passing through, a stop on a long, uncertain journey. She glanced around, taking in the worn furniture, the old photographs hanging on the walls. Nothing had changed, but everything seemed different now. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Kamara noticed a figure walking toward the house. She didn't recognize him immediately, but when he stepped closer, she realized it was Dave, her grandfather's old friend. He had been visiting her grandfather for as long as she could remember, but now seeing him again, something about his presence struck her in an odd way. Dave's smile was wide and almost too friendly, and when his eyes met hers, she felt an uncomfortable jolt run through her. There was something in his gaze, something that made her skin crawl. His eyes lingered a little too long, and the warmth that should have been there felt more like something else, something she couldn't quite name. She tried to shake the feeling off as he approached her with a cheerful hello, but the unease lingered. She forced herself to smile and make small talk, but her mind was elsewhere, focused on the strange energy that seemed to surround Dave. He was friendly, but there was something in his manner that felt off. His movements were slow, deliberate, and he kept looking at her in a way that made her feel like an object being inspected. As they exchanged pleasantries, Kamara couldn't help but feel that there was more to Dave than met the eye. And whatever it was, it unsettled her. That night, as she lay in bed, Kamara couldn't shake the image of Dave's smile and the intensity of his gaze. It was like he was trying to figure her out, to break through her defenses in a way that felt invasive. She pulled the blankets tighter around her, trying to block out the thoughts swirling in her head. But they wouldn't go away. The house felt quieter than ever, and the stillness was only amplified by the growing tension she felt in the pit of her stomach. She had barely arrived, but already it seemed like everything had shifted. The world she had left behind in the city now felt distant, and this place, this house where she had once felt safe, felt like a stranger's home. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Kamara sat quietly in the room, staring out of the window at the overgrown garden. Her thoughts were restless, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The day had been uneventful, but there was a growing tension she couldn't pinpoint. She kept thinking about Dave's eyes, the way they lingered just a little too long when he looked at her. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She shifted in her seat, trying to focus on the book in her lap, but the words on the pages blurred. A soft creak from the floorboards made her look up. Without knocking, Dave entered the room. His presence filled the space, and for a moment, Kamara felt like she couldn't breathe. He didn't ask if he could join her. He simply walked in, sat down next to her, and looked at her with that same unsettling smile. His body was too close, invading her personal space in a way that made her uncomfortable. The air seemed to thicken as he spoke. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth, as he asked her how she was adjusting to life in the house. His words were casual, but there was an underlying tone that made Kamara's skin crawl. She could feel his gaze drifting over her face, studying her like she was a puzzle to be solved. His eyes lingered, tracing the lines of her features as though searching for something. Kamara shifted uncomfortably, trying to force a smile, but she could feel the tension building inside her. She wanted to move, to distance herself from him, but somehow she couldn't. She wished she could just disappear. She looked away, focusing on the book in her hands, trying to ignore him, but his presence felt like a weight pressing down on her. She felt trapped in the small space, her every instinct telling her to run, but she stayed still, hoping the moment would pass. It didn't. Dave spoke again, his voice softer now, more intimate, but his words didn't comfort her. There was something in the way he spoke, something that made her skin prickle. He asked her about her life in the city, about her mother, and if she missed home. His questions seemed innocent enough, but there was something off about the way he asked them. She didn't want to answer him. She didn't want to share anything with him, but she found herself responding anyway, her words clipped and guarded. She told him it had been a long drive, that she hadn't had much time to think about anything else. It was a lie, but she didn't care. She just wanted him to leave her alone. The moment stretched on, and Kamara felt a knot form in her stomach. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the way he watched her as if he were waiting for her to reveal something. She stood abruptly, breaking the uncomfortable silence. She needed space. She needed to get away from him. She excused herself, telling him she was going to get some fresh air. But as she turned to leave, she saw him follow her with his eyes, his smile never fading. She hurried out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Kamara found herself in the kitchen, trying to collect her thoughts. She opened the window, letting in the cool air, hoping it would clear her mind. The breeze was refreshing, but it did little to calm the uneasy feeling gnawing at her insides. She felt like she couldn't escape it, like something was watching her, waiting for her to let her guard down. Her hand rested on the windowsill, and she glanced around, half expecting Dave to appear behind her. She didn't want him to find her. She didn't want to deal with him anymore. She needed space, she needed to feel safe. But as she turned around, there he was, standing in the doorway. He had found her, just like he always did. His presence seemed to fill the room, and once again, Kamara felt trapped. She couldn't breathe. He had the same smile on his face, that same uncomfortably close, predatory smile. He asked her if she was feeling better, if the fresh air had helped, and his voice was smooth, almost too smooth. Kamara's heart raced. How had he known she was here? She hadn't heard him come in. She could feel her body tense, her muscles stiffening as he moved closer. He was standing right behind her now, his breath warm on the back of her neck. She didn't turn to face him, couldn't bring herself to. The tension in her body was overwhelming, like a storm cloud hanging over her head, ready to burst. She felt like she was suffocating, like she couldn't escape. She had to get away from him. She had to leave this house, this town, everything. She forced herself to speak, her voice barely a whisper. She told him she was just tired, that she needed to be alone for a while. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they didn't sound convincing. He didn't move away. He just stood there, his presence suffocating, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her once again. He was waiting for her to say more, to let him in. But Kamara didn't want to let him in. She didn't want him near her. And yet there he was, always so close, always so persistent. As she finally walked away from him, back into the living room, Kamara couldn't shake the feeling that he was following her, that he was always just a few steps behind. No matter where she went, he was there, watching, waiting. The walls of the house felt smaller now, and Kamara's anxiety only deepened. She couldn't explain why, but Kamara sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The silence of the room was deafening, and the walls felt like they were closing in on her. She couldn't keep ignoring what was happening. She had tried to brush it off, to convince herself that she was overreacting. But every moment with Dave made her feel more suffocated. The way he looked at her, the way he lingered, the way his presence seemed to invade every corner of her life, it wasn't normal. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to do something, even if it meant confronting the one person she trusted most, her grandfather. She had spent days trying to talk herself out of it, trying to find an excuse to avoid the conversation. But the unease had only grown. Every time she thought of Dave, her stomach twisted, and the feeling of being trapped deepened. She couldn't stay quiet anymore. It was time to say something, to make her voice heard. She stood up, her legs trembling slightly as she walked across the room. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way down the hall, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her grandfather was sitting in his usual chair on the porch, the one with the old cushions that had seen better days. The familiar scent of wood smoke drifted through the air, but Kamara could hardly focus on the comfort of it. The sight of him sitting there, so peaceful and unaware, only made the weight of her decision feel more painful. She took a deep breath and approached him, standing a few feet away before speaking. She tried to be casual, to ease into the conversation without alarming him, but the words felt like they were lodged in her throat. She couldn't bring herself to say it directly, so she skirted around the issue, mentioning the frequency of Dave's visits and the way he made her feel. She tried to downplay it, to make it sound like it was nothing more than a passing discomfort. But even as she spoke, she could feel the tension in her chest tightening. Her grandfather didn't seem concerned. He looked at her with a bemused smile, the kind of expression that suggested he thought she was just being dramatic. He laughed softly, dismissing her worries with a few reassuring words. He told her that Dave was just an old friend, that he meant no harm and that she had nothing to worry about. His response, though gentle, only made Kamara feel more isolated. The certainty in his voice made her feel as if her fears were invalid, like she was imagining something that wasn't there. She felt small, helpless, as though she couldn't convince him to see things the way she did. His laughter echoed in her ears, but it did nothing to ease the gnawing feeling of dread that had settled deep in her gut. Kamara nodded, trying to force a smile, but inside she was falling apart. Her grandfather's words stung, but they also reinforced the terrifying reality that she was alone in this. He didn't see what she saw, and it seemed like he never would. The feeling of being misunderstood, of being dismissed, weighed heavily on her. She turned away from him, unable to hide the frustration and confusion in her expression. She wanted to scream, to make him understand, but the words never came. She couldn't explain it in a way that would make sense to him. As she retreated to her room, Kamara felt a surge of hopelessness wash over her. She was trapped in a house where no one understood her fears, where the one person who should protect her couldn't see the danger that loomed just outside their door. The walls of the room seemed to close in on her, and the air felt thick, suffocating. She felt smaller than ever, as if the weight of everything pressing down on her was too much to bear. But in that moment of despair, something shifted inside her. Kamara realized that if she didn't act now, nothing would ever change. She couldn't just sit back and wait for something to happen. She had to take control of the situation, even if it meant standing alone. She couldn't trust Dave, and she couldn't wait for someone else to see the danger. It was up to her to make sure she was safe. Her heart raced as the realization hit her. She had been passive, hoping things would resolve themselves, but they hadn't. They were only getting worse. Dave wasn't just a harmless old friend. He was a threat, one that she couldn't ignore any longer. Kamara knew that if she didn't act now, she might never have the chance to do so. With her mind made up, she paced the room, her nerves on edge. She wasn't sure what she was going to do next, but she knew she couldn't wait. The decision to confront the situation head-on had come too late, and yet it felt like her only option. She couldn't let it go on any longer. Dave had crossed a line, and now it was time to set boundaries, no matter the cost. Kamara's hands clenched into fists as she stood still, facing her reflection in the mirror. She had made her choice. She would no longer be passive. The moment had come, the point of no return. There was no going back. What happened next was up to her, and she couldn't let fear dictate her actions any longer. Kamara's days had begun to blur into one another, each feeling heavier than the last. The constant pressure, the sense of being watched had begun to wear on her. She found herself retreating into her room more often, the door shut tight against the world outside. When she wasn't hiding there, she would wander into the woods behind the house, trying to lose herself in the quiet solitude of the trees. But no matter how far she went, Dave always seemed to find her. His presence was like a shadow, always lurking just behind her, always just a little too close. The feeling of his gaze on her, the way his voice lingered in her ears, even when he wasn't speaking, was enough to make her feel like she was slowly losing control. It wasn't just the physical closeness that unnerved her. It was the way he seemed to creep into every corner of her mind. His smile, his words, even his silence felt like a constant pressure, pushing in on her, squeezing her thoughts until she couldn't breathe. She could never escape it. It felt as though no matter where she went, no matter how hard she tried to avoid him, he was always there, just waiting for her to slip up. She had no refuge, no place where she could feel safe. Even when she was alone, the weight of his presence hung in the air, a constant reminder that she wasn't free. One afternoon, after another fruitless attempt to hide from him, Kamara stood by the window of her room looking out at the trees. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment she felt the faintest trace of peace. But then she heard the familiar sound of footsteps on the porch, and her heart sank. She knew he was coming. The door opened, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her. Kamara felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to face him, didn't want to endure another one of their awkward, uncomfortable conversations. She had tried everything to avoid him, but it was always the same. His eyes never left her. His presence was always too close, too intrusive. He seemed to be testing her, waiting for her to crack, waiting for her to show any sign of weakness. But she couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't stay in this house, in this place where every corner felt like a trap. She turned away from him, her body tense with anxiety. She moved toward the door, but before she could make it out, Dave's hand shot out, his fingers brushing her shoulder. The touch sent a jolt of cold through her spine. "You don't want to talk?" he asked, his voice soft, almost coaxing. "You've been acting strange, Kamara. What's going on?" Her body stiffened. She didn't want to explain. She didn't want to tell him what was happening inside her head. It was too much, too overwhelming. She didn't want him to know the fear that had settled deep in her chest, the feeling that she was slowly being suffocated by his attention. She pulled away from him, her heart pounding, and walked quickly toward the door. But the moment her hand touched the knob, Dave's voice followed her. "Don't run away from me," he said. "You can't keep avoiding this forever." Kamara could feel her nerves unraveling. Every inch of her body screamed for escape, for distance. But she knew she couldn't outrun him. Not this time. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had to leave. There was no other choice. The thought of leaving the house, of getting in her car and driving far away, felt like a weight lifted from her chest. It was the only thing that made sense now. She would go back to the city, back to a life where she didn't feel like she was constantly being hunted. She made up her mind in that moment. There was no turning back. She couldn't stay here anymore. The house, the memories, everything about this place had become unbearable. Kamara packed her things quickly, throwing clothes and personal items into a bag, her movements swift and determined. She didn't want to look back, didn't want to linger on anything that would make her second-guess her decision. She was leaving, and nothing would stop her. But just as she was about to step out the door, she turned to find Dave standing there. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she saw something in his gaze. Something that made her blood run cold. He was too close again, his presence pressing in on her. She froze, her pulse quickening. "You're not really going to leave, are you?" Dave said, his voice low, almost a whisper. He stepped closer, too close. Kamara's heart raced, and she took a step back, her breath shallow. "I'll be fine, I just need to go," she said, her voice trembling. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, the suffocating pressure building again. She needed to escape, to get away from him before everything fell apart. Dave's hand reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm, in a way that felt too intimate, too familiar. "Stay," he urged, his tone pleading, almost desperate. "You don't have to leave. Everything will be okay. Just stay with me." Kamara's body tensed as his words sank in. She knew he didn't mean it in a caring way. His words were like a command, a way of trapping her. Kamara shook her head. She couldn't stay. Not with him. Not in this house. Not in this town. She had felt his presence closing in on her for days, and now she could finally breathe again. She walked out of the house, her feet moving swiftly toward the car, toward her escape. She didn't look back. She couldn't. As she drove away from the house, the road stretched out before her, familiar but still distant. She could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders with each mile, but the relief was short-lived. The nagging feeling that had been with her for so long still lingered in her chest. She had escaped. But what did that really mean? What if Dave wasn't finished with her? What if he followed her? What if he found her again? The thought gnawed at her, but she tried to push it away, to remind herself that she was safe for now, that she had done the right thing. That evening, as she sat in the bus station, waiting for her ride to take her away from this place for good, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that still clung to her. The bus was her escape, the final step toward freedom, but the unease in her stomach remained. The noise of the station seemed muffled, like she was hearing it from far away, and she found herself staring at the floor, lost in thought. She had left, but she still couldn't let go of the memory of Dave's eyes, his touch, the way he had watched her every move. The fear, the tension, the pressure. It all felt like it was still there, just beneath the surface. She couldn't escape it completely, not yet. The thought that he might still be out there, waiting, made her skin crawl. What if he had followed her? What if he was already waiting for the right moment to find her again? Kamara leaned back in her seat, her eyes closed, trying to block out the thoughts that crowded her mind. She told herself that she was safe, that she had done what she needed to do, but the nagging voice in the back of her head wouldn't let her rest. She wasn't sure if the battle was truly over. It felt like it wasn't. The bus arrived, and she stood grabbing her bag and walking toward the door. The weight in her chest hadn't lifted. She had left the house, but she knew the journey wasn't over. She didn't know if she could ever feel truly safe again, if she could ever fully escape the memories of what had happened. She stepped onto the bus, her thoughts heavy with uncertainty, but also with the faintest spark of hope. She had taken control of her life again. She had fought back. The bus doors closed behind her, and as it began to pull away from the station, Kamara glanced out the window, watching the town fade into the distance. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She was no longer trapped. She was free, at least for now. But as the lights of the town disappeared behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The nightmare, the fear, the control, it might still be out there, waiting for her. And she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to face it again.